Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing, the Thursday edition, coming to you. As it looked for, I haven't done one from down here for a while, down in the basement of my house, or the office, my office house or house office. You know, when we went home for the pandemic, at first it felt like working from home, and then it made it seem like my I was living at my work, and so that's why you see me. Mostly at the office these days. I'm one of those employees that prefers being there, but happen to be make more sense to be at home. I'm Brian Calley, the CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
Hi, everyone. Sarah Miller, Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Communications at SBAM. Welcome to today's briefing. And while I'm welcoming you, I would also like to welcome one of our new elite members, Ali and Companies in Okemos, Michigan. The owner is Ali Hayder, so welcome to him and team. And of course, we are welcoming this member on behalf of Marana Group, our sponsor, who is located in Kalamazoo. So Brian, let's start the show with kind of some recent news. There is a potential for a gas tax suspension on the table.
Yeah, Michigan is one of those handful of states that has two kinds of taxes on gasoline and diesel, but there's sales tax, so 6% of the sales price. So if it's $4 a gallon, the sales tax would be 24 cents on gasoline. That does not go toward roads. That goes mostly toward the school aid fund, just like all sales taxes are mostly for the school aid fund, and then a little bit goes for other purposes. But so at 450, it'd be about 28 cents a gallon. So there was a vote today in committee and also passed out of the full Michigan Senate to do essentially a gas tax holiday that would go from June through September 15th. Also in that same committee was a suspension on the gas tax proper. So sales tax is 6%. The gas tax is 27 cents per gallon, no matter what the price is. And so it would be more than a 50-cent difference per gallon if the suspension goes through. It's something that the governor before had been opposed to removing the gas tax temporarily, but had maybe signaled a willingness to consider a reduction or an elimination of the sales tax on gasoline for a few months. And so I think ultimately, if I were to guess, I would say that the legislature will send both of these gas tax reductions or holidays to the governor's desk. And if I'm reading the tea leaves right, she might sign the sales tax suspension, but veto the gas tax suspension. So about half of the savings would be experienced in that circumstance. And the reason why I think that the governor is more likely to go on the sales tax side, again, assuming this goes through the House, but they've passed this before, so I think there's a pretty good chance that it goes through the House of Representatives, that the school aid fund just got another revenue estimating conference that had billions more estimated going in over and above what has already been budgeted. So the idea of a temporary suspension of the sales tax on gasoline is something certainly the state could afford without it making any type of real difference on the school aid fund and therefore school funding. So that's what I think will probably happen, but just the first steps. But it moved so quickly out of committee and then on the Senate floor with pretty wide support, including a lot of Democrats. It's it looks like it's got a lot of momentum to go the distance.
All right. In some disappointing news, we learned earlier this week that Stalantis announced its intention to build its plant in Kokomo, Indiana, instead of Michigan.
Yeah, Stalantis is so this would be like what we'd know as Chrysler back in the good old days when it was a local company. So all of the automakers are making this shift over to electrification. And so it requires a lot of new investment in plants and building batteries. Ford kind of famously before decided Kentucky and Tennessee would be where they would make their major new investments in this area. The state provided a large incentive package that was given to General Motors to do theirs here. The state actually went after the Stalantis deal as well, but it ended up going to Indiana instead. When they went through and they cited some things, they cited, whatever deal they were able to get on the cost of electricity and business friendly practices. And I'm sure that there are incentives in that deal as well that will come out in the coming days. But I also, I saw some good business reporting that had suggested that some of Stellantis's problems with air quality issues in Detroit and the fines that they were paying and the difficulty in operating that they were facing there may have played a contributing factor as well. So this is, it's one, I can't say it's a big surprise. I know that Tennessee has been real aggressive on these things, and it's not that far away. So obviously the supply chain is still of Michigan will still be heavily involved, like the supply chain is here on everything. But the decision to move it there was one that, a lot of factors probably played into that, but it's just a reminder that that's not a local company anymore. That whereas General Motors is still a Michigan headquartered company, and Ford, was one that where it was a real kind of big shocker when that domino fell first, a local company. But Stellantis has not been a local company for a long time, so. We still kind of feel ownership in that brand, but really when it came right down to it, I think just some of the history, but then also some of the overall cost of doing business, and we'll see at some point what the incentive package looked like, but Michigan did not get that deal, and that's it's one of those things. Kind of you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. When the state loses one of these deals, it's usually kind of embarrassing and some finger pointing on whose fault it is. But then you might remember when General Motors, when the state won one of these deals, the question is like, wow, how could you pay that much? Just the state part of the incentives were $667 million for the General Motors plants, and then I think there was another $150 million or so in local property tax style incentives as well. And so you stack all that stuff up, and so. Whether you win or you lose these big deals, there's up and downside. It's a mixed bag.
All right. So another big story this week has been around the gubernatorial race, the GOP candidates. A lot of twists and turns. Who's in and who is out?
Yeah, when we talked on Monday, it was just an hour and a half before. Actually, it ended up being a couple hours before, after 5 o'clock in the evening, that the Elections Bureau had released their recommendations to the Board of Canvassers on which candidates were in and which candidates were out in terms of their recommendations on gubernatorial candidates, others too, judicial candidates, congressional candidates, but the big focus has been on these 10 Republicans that are running for governor. There won't be competition on the Democratic side of the ticket. Gretchen Whitmer, of course, will be the nominee there. So you got these 10 Republicans that are running. All of them needed to turn in 15,000 valid signatures. And I was kind of surprised when they all turned in signatures, more than 15,000. But then there's a screening process. And the Bureau of Elections believes that there were, between 9 of those 10 candidates, that there were a total of 68,000 fraudulent signatures tied to one kind of signature collection firm. Actually, somebody that I had in my previous time in politics had run into the same types of issues. I mean, this comes up every once in a while where you just have these signatures. It's an industry where you have people that go out and collect signatures. They get paid by the signature, and every once in a while, you'll get somebody who forges signatures and turns them in as though they're legitimate. What's unusual about this case is how big we're talking about. Suspected 68,000 between these 5 candidates. Between 9 candidates, but there are 5 of them that the Bureau of Elections staff went back to the Board of Canvassers and said these 5 had so many that were invalid that they didn't have enough signatures to get on the ballot. Now, it's not unusual for these things to be decided finally in court, but the first step is the Board of Canvassers. There are 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats that are on the Board of Canvassers. And in this case, it was a 2-2 deadlock, which means that these 5 candidates that the Bureau of Election staff said are not eligible for the ballot. It was deadlocked 2-2, which means those 5 candidates are not on the ballot. They have to, from here, go to court. And most of them have signaled that they are going to go to court to try to get ballot access for a variety of different reasons. The one that looks to be the closest to having enough signatures would be Perry Johnson, 1,200 according to the Bureau of Elections estimates. The argument in that case being made is that the Bureau of Elections went through and said, all right, well, we found a bunch of fraud with these particular signature gatherers. Therefore, we're going to assume that every signature that those people collected were fraudulent. And what the campaigns are saying is, the law doesn't allow you just to say, okay, they committed some fraud, therefore it must have been 100% fraud with those signature collectors. And it's an interesting legal question. I think a plain reading of the law would suggest that the Bureau of Elections is supposed to look signature by signature and to presume validity unless they have compelling reason to believe that a particular signature is not valid. Can they just say, okay, this was a circulator who did some fraud over here, therefore we're going to assume all of it's fraud? That's what they've done here. And that will be an interesting legal question. I do not know of another case that we can go back and look to predict who will win. In the case of James Craig, he does look to have, he's so far under, it's hard for me to imagine him making up enough signatures to get ballot access. So at this point, it goes to court. And one other surprise, though. So you had those 5 candidates, including 2 of the leading candidates, James Craig and Perry Johnson. The other candidates off the ballot, Michael Brown, he already withdrew from consideration. Donna Brandenburg and then Markey was the last one. So those 5, for now, off the ballot. 4 of those 5 are going to challenge it. They're posturing like they're going to challenge it in court. The other 5 that made the ballot and got approved today, so there's no more discussion there. They're just on the ballot. Included one candidate by the name of Tudor Dixon. She did turn in more signatures than anybody else, and almost 30,000, which is the maximum that you can turn in. In her case, it was a typo on the form. I wondered whether or not, she's a Republican, would the Democrats on the Bureau of Elections vote because of the typo to disqualify her from the ballot? The Bureau of Election staff, though, did say that was an inconsequential typo. It would not have misled or brought anybody to a different conclusion about what the petition was. Therefore, it should be approved. And it was not challenged like I thought maybe it would be. In politics these days, if there's a little string for the political people to pull on, sometimes it gets pulled on. In this case, though, those 5 are off and running, and then the others are challenging, and they're headed to court. Now, in Michigan, early voting, this is the August primary ballot, so the first week in August is when this election takes place. With early voting and absentee voting, we're really not too far away from when the printing. We're really about 2 weeks away from when ballot printing should start. So whose names are printed on these ballots? A big open question. So I expect that courts will make this a priority. They will look at these challenges and decide on these challenges in pretty short order, and maybe by the briefing, and maybe by a week from today. It will not be known by Monday's briefing who's on the ballot and who's not. But maybe by Thursday, more likely the week after that, we'll make sure and keep you up to date on it. It really has been quite a process, and such a wide amount of alleged fraud on these. It's nothing that we've ever seen before, and so we're kind of in uncharted territory in the way that the Bureau of Elections did their review. just one other kind of little tidbit. There are 68,000 allegedly fraudulent signatures. The Bureau of Elections looked at about 10% of them and found that they were all or largely all fraudulent. So they assumed that the other 90% from those circulators must be fraudulent. That's really going to be the basis of this case or this challenge. Can the Bureau of Election staff, they were under a short time crunch here, they couldn't compare signatures on voter cards 68,000 times, or apparently couldn't do that. And therefore they just assumed, we checked 10%, 10% were fraudulent, therefore the other 90% must be. That will be the main thing that's challenged in court. Can they use a statistical sample as opposed to going signature by signature?
All right, well, we'll certainly be paying close attention to the resolution here. For the next segment, we're going to bring on our colleague, Scott Lyon. Scott Lyon is SBAM Senior Vice President. And today we did announce a new partnership with Sensei, which is a cybersecurity benefit for our members. So Scott, welcome back to the briefing. Thank you for joining us. Could you give everybody a little bit of an overview about our newest member benefit?
Sure, I can. Just going back to the last segment, very early on in my career, someone said, follow the money. And it sounds like this voter fraud issue, signature fraud issue is a classic example of follow the money that I think, Brian, you said a couple years back, a signature was worth about $2 and now it's worth about 15. Do the math on that and you're talking about $1 million worth of fraudulent signatures that were gathered by these folks. So once again, follow the money. Same thing is true here with cybersecurity, follow the money. Cybersecurity has been on our radar screen here at SBAM for the last several years. During the pandemic, we kind of turned away and thought that there were other issues that were more important at the moment than cybersecurity, but now we're back at it. And just to give you an idea of what kind of an issue we're dealing with and why we think this is such an important issue for our members, over the last couple of years, the number of cybersecurity attacks on small and mid-sized companies has gone up by 424%. 424% since 2020. That's a huge number. And I look at, for whatever reason right now personally, in my email at SBAM, about 4 times a week, I get something that looks like an invoice from somebody I've never heard of, and it's always the same thing. They're always, it's a bill, I think it's a bill, I don't open it, from Norton Antivirus, right? Comes from different people, but I've gotten that same email probably 30 or 40 times over the last couple of months. It's a phishing attempt. They want me to open the email, and once I do that, they're off to the races. 95% of all the security breaches that go on in small business are because someone opens an email like that, opens the attachment to an email just like that. So 95% of the cybersecurity breaches could be prevented with better educating your employees. 92% of all of those breaches are going after money, follow the money. They're going after either directly trying to steal, or they're doing something called a ransomware, where they're going to lock up your system, make you pay ransom to get your information back. So knowing all of that is going on in our world, in our community, we've teamed up with a company out of Ann Arbor called Sensei, Sensible Cyber Security, to bring a product to our members that is pretty timely. In a large company, they're going to have a chief information officer. And on that CIO's team are going to be people that are absolutely laser focused on preventing cybersecurity attacks. Sensei does that for our members. They are essentially a fractional or outsourced cybersecurity officer available to our members. And the services that they will provide include measuring and monitoring the cybersecurity health of your company and providing you with an overall kind of cybersecurity score, if you will. From that, they will say, all right, here's a prioritized action plan. Here are the things that you need to do to make yourself, to make your company less of a target. They will have incident responses showing you kind of where those attacks are coming from and how they're trying to penetrate your system. They will do, I call it friendly hacker. They will try to penetrate your system and tell you where your weak points are. They will go after your employees. They will try to get your employees to open up one of those emails like the one I described from Norton. For all I know, that could be from our managed service provider. I don't know, but they will attempt to do that. They'll be your cybersecurity advocate, speak plain language to you about here's what it means, here's what you need to do to make yourself less of a target. They're going to do some briefings for us. They've already done some articles that you'll start to see in our newsletter, in our magazine. And they're going to help you with cybersecurity insurance as well. Right now, most of the cybersecurity insurance that small business owners are purchasing do not cover the things that are happening in the cyber world. Take a look at your policy and see if it covers a ransomware attack. In most cases, it probably will not. So they're going to look at your insurance coverage and tell you where your holes are. And then if there isn't an attack, they're going to be right alongside of you, making sure that you get back up and running. And they're going to do that through a partnership, either with your internal IT staff or with your managed service provider if you outsource that. They're going to work side by side with those folks to make sure that your IT, your security is top notch. So it's something that in the world we live in today, unfortunately, follow the money, follow the money, follow the money, follow the money, and make yourself less of a target is the whole idea, the whole concept here.
Yeah, this concept is kind of familiar, reminiscent of something that we've seen a lot of small businesses, actually including the Small Business Association of Michigan, take advantage of in recent years, is this idea of having fractional, and the original position was CFO or Chief Financial Officer. You know, a lot of companies aren't going to have they're not big enough to have a full-time Chief Financial Officer, so might have a fractional Chief Financial Officer. And it's kind of like that, where you have like a CIO, a Chief Financial Officer, but it's just a person you're getting some time from. But the thing I really liked about this approach and why we thought it made sense for our members is that if somebody's a member of your team, not somebody who's selling you things. So yeah, they'll help make sure that you have the coverage you think you have on your insurance, but they don't sell insurance. Yeah, they'll help you identify problems and issues, but they're not selling and installing equipment, or like that's your managed service provider that does that. This is really a person that's on your team to work through and make sure that you're as secure as you can be, and to the extent that you got holes, identify those holes and provide some input on what needs to be done to shore it up. So great small business member of ours, a VIP member of the Small Business Association of Michigan, active on our leadership council as well. And of course, we love to do business with our active members. So any questions that you have, I think we've got a link that we've put in that you can follow or email me or Scott to get connected if it sounds like something you'd like to take advantage of.
A brand new offer and very much collaborative with your team and whether your team is internal or external. They're not looking to displace anything that you have going now. They're looking simply to enhance and make sure that your company is maybe just, think of it this way. You're being chased by a bear, be faster than the other guy, right? So be less of a target.
All right, thanks, Scott. Really appreciate the work that, by the way, whenever we offer a new product or service, it's vetted through a committee of small business owners. So we have a team of our members that have signed up and said, hey, on the products and services that are endorsed by, recommended by the Small Business Association of Michigan, they have to go through a very rigorous process with actual small business owners in the screening. And we get a lot of offers, very few are approved, and this is one that we're just really excited to offer out. Unfortunately, this is becoming a bigger and bigger problem every single year.
All right. Yeah, we are great. Thank you, Scott, for joining us today. Monday's actually Memorial Day, so we won't have a show for you on Monday. We hope you all have a wonderful weekend, enjoying whatever your plans might be. We will be back here next Thursday, so we'll see you then.
Thanks, everybody. See you on Thursday.